Hi, friends. Here we go. Who has two thumbs, one eye, and is excited to talk to you about Knative today? This girl. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being friendly faces. This is my first solo talk ever and only my third live conference talk. So I appreciate your support. The kind thoughts you are inevitably thinking about me and rooting for me. I am a developer advocate at VMware. My name is Whitney Lee. Among other things, I make this show on Tanzu.tv called Enlightening, where I stand behind a light board and have guests come onto my show and teach me cloud concepts. And then I draw my understanding as I'm learning. And it's a streaming show, so it's interactive. We have great questions. It's super fun. So this was last week's show. I learned about cartographer, and this is what the final board looked like when we were done. I have some contact information. I'll show this slide again at the end because right now you don't like me enough yet to want it, but hopefully by the end, if I did it right, you will. So we'll see. So today I'm going to talk to you about Knative. And I'm going to draw for you as I talk. So Knative is, I'm shaking, sorry. Knative is a technology that sits on top of Kubernetes. And it enhances and simplifies the way that your applications run on Kubernetes. So your Knative has two independent parts, Knative serving and Knative eventing. So today we are going to focus on Knative serving. Now, to understand how Knative serving simplifies the way your application runs on Kubernetes, it's helpful to talk about how your application runs on Kubernetes, on vanilla Kubernetes without Knative. So if, as an application developer, when you have an application you want to deploy, you need to package that into an image. And once you have that image in Kubernetes, you create a deployment. So this is an object in Kubernetes. So your deployment is going to manage a replica set. Ooh, look how much I'm shaking. I knew this was going to happen, but what can you do, you know? So your deployment manages a replica set, which manages one or many pods. And then pods are the smallest unit of compute in Kubernetes. So the pod is actually where your application is running. So there you go. The application's running in Kubernetes. That wasn't so hard. What's the big deal? Why do we need Knative? The problem is this running application, let's say this purple box is your running application, right now you can't access it. So to be able to get traffic to your running application, you need to create in Kubernetes a service. And the service keeps track of where all your running applications are. Each service correlates to a deployment. So your pods might be running across different machines, and the service will also take care of load balancing for you. So the service abstraction knows where your pods are and gets your traffic to your running application in Kubernetes. So great, that's not so hard. Why do we need Knative? This only works from within the cluster. So if you need to access from outside of the cluster, which of course you do, you would need to create another object called an ingress. The ingress is what gives you access to your cluster, and it's going to be concerned with DNS. And if you're running a secure application, you also need to configure that with probably a cert manager and get your TLS certificates in order. And it takes manual configuration for each domain name you're trying to hit inside. So that takes a lot to configure. If you're working with Kubernetes and you want to be able to auto-scale, you're going to need to have a horizontal pod auto-scaler, and that's going to scale based on CPU and memory. And then also in Kubernetes, you need to concern yourself with configuration and secrets. So as you can see, I can't spell secrets because I'm nervous. As you can see, this is a lot to manage. And not only is it a lot to create all these objects at a very minimum level, you would need at least 30 probably lines of YAML with 3 different objects, and then as you add features, more and more. But you also have to hook all the hoses up to each other with labels and selectors and make sure everything knows how to talk to and access everything else. And it can get to be quite complicated. So that's the stage we set for why we want to work with Knative. So with Knative, we want to create a Knative service. And so we could do that with a single YAML, about 10 lines of code. Here I'm going to talk about doing it imperatively just because that's easier to draw with a CLI. So you would install or have an ops person install Knative into your cluster, and then you would be able to run the commands knative service create. And then you give your service a name, so we'll call ours Sunshine. And then you tell it where your application is, your application image is. You need that one. So we'll say ours, it's rainbows. A very professional or very serious operation here. And so with just this minimum amount of information, the rest with defaults will fill in anything that we didn't right now. This will spin up for us a Knative service. I say a Knative service because I want to disambiguate between a Kubernetes service, which is a completely different abstraction, and when I was learning, it confused me. So this simple command creates for us a Knative service. And if you remember nothing else today, remember this. You run this, you spins up a Knative service, it returns to you a URL, and now you can access your running application. So all this Kubernetes stuff that I just talked about is being created for you under the hood, but you, as an application developer, you don't need to know the details of that. All you need to know is my application's running now. And on top of that, if when Knative, was installed into your Kubernetes cluster, if it was installed with auto TLS, then your application is you don't only get that URL, but it's a secure URL. So that can be something that developers don't at all have to worry about. So thank you very much. We're done. Just kidding. But this is all you need to know, really, if you know nothing else. But for me, I love understanding how things work, and that will help me understand forever. If you just tell me a fact, it means nothing. But if you tell me why, then it'll stick for me. So I'm going to tell you everything that's going on under the hood and how this is able to happen. But then I'm also going to describe for you, in addition to just this ease of deployment, there are a lot of enhancements that happen. So I'm going to start keeping a list of all of our benefits down here. So one is, where I'm going to call it, for ease of deployment, I'm just going to put less YAML. And then for HTTPS, we'll call that auto TLS. So 2 benefits right off the bat. So now let's talk about what's happening under the hood. So our Knative service is going to create 2 Knative objects. One is called a root. The root is concerned with the ingress and the service and the way traffic's flowing into the application. And then we also are going to we're not doing anything, actually. It's already done. This is all happening automatically for us by Knative, but the other object that gets spun up is a configuration. Now, configuration concerns itself with pod specs. So it's interested in things like a port number. I don't know why that happened. Port number, or environment variable, or where your image is, or PVC, like if you need to access persistent storage. Now, our configuration object manages a stream of revisions. So since it's the first time we are running our application, it's going to start with revision 1. Now, a revision is a Knative abstraction that is a snapshot in time of what your application code looks like with the configuration at this moment. And it is immutable, and sorry, there's a camera now. As you update your service, it's going to create more revisions instead of updating any particular revision. So this is our first one. So revision 1 has been automatically spun up. And then our revision is going to make a Kubernetes deployment. So in this way, I like this because it illustrates, oh goodness. Sorry. It illustrates, well, you get the idea. I don't know why it doesn't want to work over there. So it illustrates that Knative sits on top of Kubernetes, but it doesn't obscure it. So if you're in your cluster and you look at all your resources, you will see a Kubernetes deployment that's associated with your Knative service. So this is our deployment. And we still, just like in Kubernetes, we have one or many running pods in here. And then just like in Kubernetes, or this is basically Kubernetes, our pod has a running application. So if we take our traffic into our cluster, well, actually, one more component I'm going to talk about. Our revision, besides making the Kubernetes deployment, it also makes a Knative pod autoscaler. So there's an autoscaler that's associated with each revision. So there are 2 objects there. All right, let's talk about how the traffic flows through this. The traffic comes in through the root. The root, by default, is going to send 100% of the traffic to the latest revision. We only have one right now, so it's pretty easy. And then the revision is going to send the traffic through to the running application. And that's what's happening under the hood. When you run that kn service create commands, that's when you get that URL back, that's all the objects that have been made. So let's dig in now on what enhancements are happening that, besides being simpler, what makes this even objectively better. I had a guest on my show who said that it is his firm belief that Knative should be installed into every Kubernetes cluster ever. So when I said like a flat, like objectively better, it's like I really think it is that cut and dry. So let's start by talking about the autoscaler. The autoscaler is going to scale your application based on concurrency, based on the number of requests to the application. So that is different from how Kubernetes does it. Kubernetes will scale based on CPU and memory. The number of requests can be a lot easier and more relatable metric to work with, but it's also good if you want to run functions as a service, which is when you want to scale your application so that each instance of your application only manages one request at a time. Now, when Knative was in my periphery, when I was on a team when someone else was working on Knative, but I didn't touch it myself or even concern myself. It was basically like the same stand-up. They were talking about their Knative thing, and I was only half paying attention, eating my breakfast. You know how it is. And what I associated Knative with is serverless. And we're already like almost halfway through this presentation, and this is the first time I'm saying that word. So I think it's an important feature of Knative for sure, but I think it's maybe not the most important or just a feature. But when I say serverless, that's a loaded and confusing term, and what I'd prefer to call it is scale to zero. So in all this time that I've been talking, we've started our application. We got that URL like ages ago now, and no one else has accessed our application. So what is happening is when our pods are not being used, they will disappear. Whoop. So our pod is gone because it hasn't been used. And this can save an organization a lot of money. In contrast, in Kubernetes, you have to have a running pod at all times to receive requests to your application. So a joke within the community is scaling to zero is the easy part. Scaling from 0 to 1 is the hard part. So let's talk about how that works, for the same reasons we like to talk about how everything works. So there's also a Knative component called an activator. The activator is a namespace scoped component. So the way these two are associated with a particular revision, the activator is not. It's watching different. It's watching several revisions. But once the once the pod goes away, the activator is now what's watching traffic that comes into your application. So when traffic comes in now and there's no pod running, the activator sees that traffic is coming into revision 1, and then the activator is like, hey, yo, autoscaler, there's some traffic coming in. And autoscaler is like, hey, yo, deployment, make a pod. And then the pod's like, oh, got it. Hurry up. And then and then the pod is made, and then the traffic can be received. And everybody's happy and relaxed, just like me. That's wonderful. So we have a scale to 0. So now let's talk about when it's time to start changing our application, because of course it's not going to stay in this first states forever. So there's another, so really best practice would be just to update your Knative service YAML and be declarative. But if we're doing it here, we'd use a Knative service update command. We're going to update our Sunshine service. And here's the thing. We have this Rainbows application. It's pretty cool. But I have this radical new idea that maybe instead of a Rainbows application, I wanted to make it a Spiders application. But I'm not really sure how people are going to take it. And so I don't really want to roll it out into production or even like give it to a massive audience yet. I just want to be able to like show my friends the Spiders and see what they think of my new application. So I make a Spiders version by giving it a new image, and then I can add a tag. So my new command is going to create a revision 2, and then I can tag that with, we'll call it spy for Spiders. So I have a revision 2 with a tag, and then I've configured it so that only because of this tag, there will be a custom URL. So the URL will be, it'll be prefixed with the SPI. And then it'll be the URL. So when traffic comes into that particular URL, not my main one, then it will go, when it comes in through this URL, then it will go to revision 2. But otherwise, 100% of my traffic is still going to revision 1. So only my friends can see the spider. And I'd also like to say there's not room to draw it, but this revision 2 is also spinning up its own deployment, its own autoscaler. So you can see that under the hood. So my friends love the Spiders. They're amazing. The thing is I'm talking to them, I'm talking to my team, and what we're figuring out is, why is it Rainbows or Spiders? Why can't it be both, you know? So we've decided we want to make a Rainbow Spiders application, and we're ready to take that to production. So now we're going to spin up a new revision by changing our image. And I want to say here too, I'm showing an example where we're changing the image, and each time is making a new revision. But also, if I change an environment variable, that would also make a new revision. If I changed a port number, that would make a new revision, like anything would. But right now, we're doing some spider rainbows. So our revision 3 that we're not going to tag, we're spinning that up. Now, by default, it would send 100% of traffic to revision 3, but we don't want that. That would be irresponsible to send that much traffic, like just throw everything at production. So we're going to take advantage of traffic splitting. So we got custom routes and traffic splitting. So the way traffic splitting works is when we have traffic coming in, we will configure, we'll have some of it going to our revision 1 that we know works, and we'll have some coming to revision 3. And this is completely customizable. So at first it would be responsible to do like 90% to revision 1 and only 10% to revision 3. And then we test it, we make sure it works, it's really great. So now we're gonna up it to 50-50. You know how it is, a canary deployment, work on it. And then finally, we're getting 100% of traffic to revision 3, and we've been able to do that responsibly. Responsibly with traffic splitting. I've heard that in the Knative project, they're working on a duration-based rollout, so you don't need to do this manually. You can specify an amount of time and say over the next 8 hours, I want all the traffic to go from this revision to this revision, and it'll do that for you. All right, so we have 100% of traffic to revision 3. We're feeling good. Rainbow Spiders. in your mind's eye, when you're imagining rainbow spiders, is it like the spiders are themselves rainbows colored, or is it like rainbows everywhere and then spiders are like sliding? I'm thinking like slides. Anyway, so we have this. The thing is, we have all our traffic going to revision 3. Everyone loves rainbow spiders. The thing is, when we brought the spiders dependency into our application, we found out that the witches put a vulnerability in the spider. So we're like, oh no, this is no good. We need to get back to the safest revision. And Knative, as you can imagine, rollbacks are very easy. That's a simple change to your Knative service YAML, and then easily 100% of traffic is back to revision 1, and you're back in the safe zone. So I think I've rushed through this a tad because I'm so excited. One thing these are the main benefits. I think I got it all. And one thing I'd like to talk about, though, is getting it installed and how you can go and play with it now that you understand how it works and get your hands dirty with it. So I've kind of glossed over and says, oh, your ops person will install it, which is true if you're doing like a production level because you need to install a networking layer in addition to installing Knative. Knative used to be packaged with Istio, like a pretty thick service mesh, but now there are some really lightweight options, so you can it can be a lot easier to deal with. But you as a developer, they have a plugin for the KNCLI called Quick Start. But the best way to get your hands dirty with it, I would say, is to go to the knative.dev. So go to the Knative website, look at the tutorials section, and then that'll teach you how to very easily on your local laptop spin up a kind cluster. So kind stands for Kubernetes in Docker. So you can spin up a kind cluster locally, and it'll show you how to very easily create an application. It'll demonstrate scaling to 0 and traffic splitting. One thing I don't think it does that I recommend you do is go ahead and look at everything that's running in your namespace and look at the deployment and the pods and see all those the straight up Kubernetes abstractions running under the hood there. I think that's all I have for y'all. Thank you so much for being a part of my very first talk and being engaged and smiling at me. It means more than you know. And maybe now you care about this, maybe not. I hope you come hang out during the show. It's really fun. I did do a couple episodes on Knative already. We did separate ones for Knative serving and Knative eventing. So if you really want to get deep in on it, I recommend you watch those shows. I have some stickers up here with the enlightening if you want to take one with you. And I think that's all I have today. I appreciate everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Yeah. Oh, questions. I was trying to avoid that, y'all.
First of all, thank you for the presentation and the drawings.
Thanks.
So I have actually 2 questions. So is Knative can do service mesh?
Can it do service mesh?
Is a service mesh or?
So Knative itself is not service mesh. In the past, you would have to install Istio to be able to use the routing capabilities of Knative, and Istio is a service mesh. And so now you don't have to, and Istio is pretty heavy and full featured, like it can do a lot of things, not just the networking layer that Knative needs it to do. So, so there are now lighter weight options too.
Okay. And my second question is, in terms of observability, how is Knative compared to Kubernetes, for example?
Mauricio is a maintainer on the project here in the front row, so.
So compared to Kubernetes, it's just like it's a Kubernetes extension, so you can use the normal like mechanisms for observing it as well, right? Like it provides integration with all, with Prometheus, and it provides its own Grafana dashboards and all that stuff. So for every component that Whitney listed, like the activators and all these things, they are all sending metrics, and you can just actually observe them while they work. Yep. But at the end of the day, as Whitney explained, like it's creating Kubernetes objects, so you can use your existing tooling for debugging that.
It was a great talk. My question is regarding GitOps. So if you're using GitOps, would you just basically not have the deployment environments or the other 30, 50 YAMLs you have? You just have one service one, and then you update that, and that gets
That's
working?
correct,
And
yes.
would it work with things like Arco CD, those kinds of tools? They just work?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Hi, thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
One of the feature was scale to 0 if there's no request. What if the application nature is a batch job which executes say once in 2 days, so there is no request to it, but it needs to be activated or triggered, after some interval. So can we stop Knative to bring the instance to 0 rather than keep it running? Is how difficult or easy it is to configure?
So you're saying that how difficult is it to configure to scale it to 0?
Not to scale it to 0, keep the instance running even if there is no request.
It's just as like one field on the YAML. It's like your minimum that you would want to keep running.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, great talk. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I'm going to precursor this by saying I'm a Kubernetes noob.
Right on.
So with the Knative auto-scaling, I think cascading cold starts, I've been told, is a big problem. Does Knative do anything to help with that problem? Yeah?
Yes, there are a few things that your operator can do to help with the cold start. So one would be like to cache your image on every single node. The other ones are escaping me at the moment, but I'm sure Mauricio can chime in. So it's definitely a problem that Knative loves to talk about. If you have ideas or thoughts, if you jump in, if you want to join the conversation around Knative, if you go to the knative.dev site, there's a link to the Slack workspace. And so it's a problem everyone's excited to talk about. And the things right now to minimize the cold start issue are more things that like individual operators can do to help Knative as opposed to project level changes. But Mauricio can speak a little more to what exactly those changes are.
Cool, thank you. And mine was definitely rainbow-colored spiders.
Thank you.
Quick note about that, like Whitney mentioned the activator, and that's pretty much acting as a buffer for requests. So basically, even if there is no instance of the application, it's going to be buffered, like the request is going to be buffered until you get the application up. And if that application is calling another one, so the activator will kick in again for the second one. No, in order to activate like an application to be scaled up, you need to basically have a request. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much, y'all. This has been fun.